Just like anything in life, there's pros and cons, and agreement for sale is no different. Hey, in today's video, I want to talk about some pros and some cons about agreement for sale deals. If you're new to this channel, I'm Dave from Investor Mel and Dave. My wife and I have now purchased over 264 units in 5 different countries: Canada, US, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Dominican Republic. We are the proud founders of the Action Family Mentoring Program, and Mel and I, we were able to quit our jobs in our 30s. We release a video every single week, so make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to get notified. Now let's dive into pros and cons. So agreement for sale, let's just take a quick overview, right? If you want an in-depth breakdown, I've got other videos on agreement for sale, but a very quick overview of AFS. There's 3 parts to it. There is the asset, right? The asset over here on the left side, with the seller, okay? The seller continues to own the asset. Then there is the contract, right? The power of attorney, right? There's a contract that wraps around that asset, and I'll explain a little bit in a sec. And then the buyer over here. So the buyer and the seller enter into a contract, right? Giving the buyer power of attorney over said asset, okay? So the buyer can control the asset through a power of attorney over here. Now again, the seller continues to own the asset, so it's them on title, on deed, right? And they continue to hold the mortgage. So they're the ones that are responsible for the debt, the security on that property. That's AFS in a quick nutshell, but today's video is more about the pros and cons. So let's talk about the pros. What are the pros? Well, first off, agreement for sale, you do not have to qualify for the financing. As mentioned, right, the seller here remains on the mortgage for the asset. So the buyer does 0 qualifying. The seller might ask a couple questions and might have a few qualifying things, but there's no bank, there's no financial institution, there's no mortgage broker, there's no mortgage specialist, there's no filling out forms, there's no, right? Unless again, the seller asks for it, but the whole point of AFS is that there is no qualifying, okay? So I'll just put, there's pros, there's no qualifying. Okay, I'll just put QF for qualifying, right? And some people can't qualify. Like, think about it. If you're watching this video and you don't have the best credit, or you don't have a super huge down payment, right? This might be a good deal for you in agreement for sale. Something else. Pros, quick, right? Quick closing. I don't have very good writing here. My high school teachers were correct in that sense. I do not have good writing. So quick closing. What do I mean by this? Well, as long as the seller agrees to the contract and the buyer agrees to the contract, there's no waiting for the deal to get funded. There's not waiting for the lawyers or the attorneys or title companies to transfer things. You sign a power of attorney, right? That's pretty much it. And now you control the building through a contract, through a POA. So you can have, like, I'm just thinking the most recent deal that we did, I think we closed it in like 3 to 5 days. Very, very quick closing, okay? Because you're signing a contract. The title and deed don't actually transfer over. Let's put small down payments. Now, this is not always, but you can find some really good deals where they'll do a 5% or even sometimes even lower, 5% down payment or even lower than that. Again, everything can be negotiated. At the end of the day, it's whatever the seller is comfortable with, okay with, receiving as a down payment from the buyer in order as an incentive for them to sign the power of attorney, right? The contract. So in the deals that I've done agreement for sale, it has been typically lower than, you know, the 20%, the 25%, the 30% the financial institutions were looking for. And we have creative financing to get around all that anyway. But in agreement for sale, the beauty of it is a very small down payment in most situations. Decision making. What I mean by this is, at the end of your term, your agreement for sale term, let's just make it up. Let's say you have a 5-year term. Okay, you have a 5-year term. The buyer and the seller agree that they'll do this POA, this contract for 5 years. Okay, you can, right? It's flexible. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Flexible. You can decide to do what you want when you want in regards to liquidating the asset. Okay, the flexibility of this is, let's say in the 5-year term, after a year, you don't want this property anymore and you want to sell it. You can. Let's say after 2 or 3 years, the market has gone up and there's a spread to be made, right? Let's say you bought it here and now it's worth this and you want to get that spread. You can, right? You can sell it at any time if it's very flexible. The other beauty thing, and I'm always looking at it from like an investor, through eyes of an investor, the lens of an investor, whatever you want to say here, but I like the flexibility. Because think about this, typically when you buy a deal, you buy it, it is yours. It's in your name and X, Y, Z, etc. This keeps you flexible. If you want to sell it to the open market to anyone, you can. If you want to, if you're like, hey, you know what, this deal is actually a racehorse deal, it's making me so much money, I now want to flip it into one of my entities. So the beauty of this is, as long as the seller is made whole by the buyer, like as long as on selling, you pay them whatever you agreed upon initially, it doesn't matter and they can't say who you can or cannot sell it to. So like I said, if you want to sell it to the open market, cool. If you're like, hey, I bought it here, now this asset is worth here 3 years down the road, 4 years, 5 years down the road, and I want to, go get a mortgage for this lower price, which will be easy because if it's under the 80% loan to value. Anyway, that's a whole other video. But what I'm saying is you can actually flip it into your portfolio and keep it flexible. If it went up just a little and you're not happy with it, you sell it, you make a smaller profit, but again, you're not stuck with any properties because it has that flexibility. Okay, so now let's get into some of the cons. So, and this is subjective, right? You might think it's a positive, you might think it's a con, but I'm just kind of going through some ideas. So maybe a con of doing an agreement for sale is you actually don't own it. So you don't actually own it from day one. And again, honestly, from a couple of years ago, I used to be of the mentality of, I didn't necessarily love the agreement for sale for this exact reason. I like doing seller financing, but I like having the asset under my entity's name. I have the mortgage, the debt on the property, right? And there's no right or wrong here. But now more than ever, I'm like, you know what? I'm okay not owning it for now for all of those, right? The flexibility and the different terms that you can do. So this might be a con to some people, it might not be a con to others. Another con is, and again, some people are subjective on this. Let's put PNW, personal net worth. Because you don't actually own it, right? Like Mel and I, we look at our personal net worth statements every single month, and we look at our assets, and basically the PNW quick nutshell is, what is the market value, right? How much do you owe on it? And then the difference, right, the spread of between how much you owe and how much it's worth is your personal net worth, because you own it and the banks look at it as your net worth, your personal net worth. Well, these ones don't really count towards that because you don't have ownership of it. And some people might be, a different opinion on this because you do control the asset. But the typical personal net worth that I see, that I use at the financial institutions, they like the ownership. So in this particular agreement, they would not attribute any agreement for sale deals that we have. So it would not help you on your personal net worth statements. The next con that some people might see is, because it is a contract, what happens if there is an issue, right? What happens, and what I mean by this, okay, this used to be one of my fears as well. I've now done enough research that I'm over, but I know this is an issue that some people still have as a fear. So when you actually own a property, you have ownership, you're on title, or you or your entity is on title, on deed, and you're shown as the rightful owner of it, okay? Some people are worried about doing agreement for sales because, and I used to think this way as well, is, well, okay, in an AFS deal, the seller still shows up on title, right, on deed. The seller still has the debt on it. What if the seller decides to create an issue and decides to contest the contract, or decides to hire a lawyer and say, you know what, we don't want this contract anymore, right? We're not doing it anymore. Then now you got an issue on your hands, right? Whereas if you own the deal, it's like, I own the deal. You can't take it away from me as long as I'm making my payments. This, you might have to fight it. If they decide they want to fight the contract and you don't actually own it, you might have an issue with that. So I know, again, subjective, but this is something that some people feel is a con of agreement for sale deals. The last one here for cons is, I'll put capital, I'll just put CG, yeah, CG, capital gains, okay? So because you do not own the asset, like just think about this, let's backtrack. When you own a deal, right, you own an income producing asset and you sell it, okay? And I'm not talking 1031 exchange in the US, I'm just saying you sell it and you realize the gains from the asset. So you sell the property, capital gains, right? The US is different, it depends on the situation. Canada, but depending what time you watch this actual video, the inclusion rate has been up to 67%, right? And we've got videos on that as well, if you're not clear on what I mean there. But what I'm getting at is when you sell an income producing asset, you get capital gains. So meaning there's a portion that's exempt and there's a portion, there's an inclusion rate that you are taxed on. Okay, so before in Canada it used to be 50% that you would get taxed and 50% exempt. At the time of this video, hopefully it changes. Hopefully you're watching this in the future and you're saying, Dave, this has changed. But for the time being, it's the reality. The portion that they tax you on is 67 and then the exempt portion is 33. So what does this mean? So if I sold the building, 67% would be my tax rate that I have and the other 33 would be exempt. Well, you don't actually own this deal. So you don't get a portion exempt at all. See what I'm saying here? So because again, you don't have the ownership, you don't actually sell it as a capital gain. So talk to the accountants, talk to the CPAs. I'm definitely not one, but what I'm getting at is the spread that you make from selling this deal, they're most likely, again, every case is different, but they're most likely won't be a portion that is exempt, just like the capital gains, because it won't be considered that, okay? So just know that they might tax it different. They might tax it as active income. They might tax it as like flipping. Again, talk to the accountants and the CPAs, but that is something that I know people talk about. The capital gains they see as a con on the agreement for sale deals. All right, so there you have it. Again, just like any real estate transaction, just like any type of real estate transaction, right? Whether it's seller financing, if it's traditional financing, if you're going to do agreement for sale, if you're doing wrap mortgages, if you're doing sub-2, if you're using people's retirement funds, registered funds, like there's always going to be pros and cons to every type of real estate investment. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm saying just know what they are. So today, I wanted to do another quick video for you guys on agreement for sales, pros and cons. I want you to know before you start buying these deals instead of after the fact and you're like, oh, I wish someone would have told me. Thanks for staying right till the end. If you like this type of video about agreement for sales, check this one out right here. I'm Dave and I'll see you in the next one.